Hello and welcome to Newsmakers and our first interview of 2022. I'm your host, Lisa Pugh. Today we sit down with the outgoing Secretary of the Department of Administration, Joel Brennan. During a particularly contentious time in state politics, he was the first member of the Governor Evers' cabinet to be confirmed. He promised effective relations with the legislature and had no idea of the time of his appointment about the pandemic challenges that lie ahead. We'll talk about that and more as he leaves his position later this week. Thank you for joining us, Secretary Brennan.
Thanks for having me.
So you've been on the job almost exactly 3 years now, and you entered a highly partisan environment. I was looking at some of your early interviews, you talked about wanting to have a more open relationship with the legislature and to increase the effectiveness of DOA. Do you think you've accomplished that?
Well, I think we have made strides on that. You know, as you say, both in Wisconsin and nationally, this is a hyper-partisan time. There's never been such division. But we've found some ways to find common ground. And I think we've all lived through this unprecedented time of a pandemic. One of the things I'm really proud of is at DOA and in the Evers administration, from day one, the governor put a focus on the state employees and making sure that he got the most out of them and respected all of them. And that's part of what we have done at DOA. In an enterprise of 35,000 people, a department that has 1,500, we have to get the most out of them. And I think especially during the time of COVID-19, that state employees have proven themselves time and time again. So, you know, while a lot of people play up the negatives and the rancor between the executive branch and the legislative branch, some of that is true. It happens in every period. But I've also appreciated the opportunity, especially in things like the State Building Commission, to get together on things so that we can move Wisconsin forward in productive ways.
Well, that's good to hear. You know, one of your most significant roles, of course, during your tenure was navigating that biennial budget process and trying to get the governor's priorities passed. In the last year, we saw the governor sign a biennial budget, which was really vastly different from his original proposal. Do you still count that as a victory?
I think it's a victory for the state of Wisconsin when you don't go for long periods of time without any budget, which would have been an alternative. And in that budget, the governor laid out priorities from the beginning of his administration: infrastructure, broadband, education. And as I think about what happened with the state budget, which frankly seems like a long time ago now, right, but with the passage of that, the governor was able to secure another $425 million for transportation infrastructure, another $125 million for broadband to make sure that we're getting as far as we can with access. We got to 2/3 in funding for K-12 education. We made investment in higher ed. In addition, when the governor signed the budget, he announced that another $100 million was going to go towards K-12 education out of the federal funds. So, you know, all of that, in addition to being able to lower the tax burden on middle-class Wisconsin families, something that he promised when he ran for office, I think all of those were things that were ways that we moved Wisconsin forward during this time. And there will be arguments over who should get the credit and, you know, who's to blame for this or that. You know, I think in some fashion, we just need to say, hey, Wisconsin's motto is forward, and we've been able to move forward on a number of these fronts.
You know, certainly the Foxconn contract renegotiation was a headline maker during your tenure. You and your staff spent a lot of time negotiating that, and we just learned a few weeks ago that the Taiwan-based company has just qualified for their first state tax credits. This was kind of talked about as the crown jewel of the previous administration, and I'm wondering how you think history should look at that Foxconn relationship and how Wisconsin should look at it going forward.
Yeah, well, in some ways, I think we have to go back to the beginning. You know, just after the governor was elected in 2018, the legislature, in a lame duck session, they changed the rules so that the governor didn't have the opportunity to even appoint the person he would put in charge at WEDC for the first 10 months of his administration. Mark Hogan was a holdover from the Walker administration. I think Mark was uncomfortable in the role that the legislature had given him and tried hard, and I worked a lot alongside him. But frankly, the deal had already changed by the time the governor took office. And we spent a lot of time in that first year trying to both salvage what we could out of what Foxconn had promised at that time and holding them accountable to state taxpayers, to the local units of government. So just ensuring that Wisconsin could get everything it could out of that. But that deal, it was laid out that it was going to be unlike any other deal that Wisconsin had ever undertaken. And that simply was not the case. And a lot of that had been set even before we started. As Missy Hughes came in and her team at WEDC, they were able to work with Foxconn to make it much more like every other economic development project in the history of the state of Wisconsin over the last 175 years. Foxconn's going to be able to grow incrementally. They're going to be able to do it along their timelines, not forced, but also just to be able to do things as economic development happens in the state of Wisconsin. We took a $3 billion potential burden to the state, transformed that into an $80 million investment in Foxconn, or a potential $80 million investment, but it also requires Foxconn to continue growing and to continue investing in the state of Wisconsin. I think it's one of the things that this administration should hold up as something that we ought to be very proud of. Now, by the same token, we continue to work, and I still say we, even though I'm going to be out the door this week, but I know Missy at WEDC and everybody within the Evers administration continues to work with the local units of government in Racine County and trying to make sure that we get everything we can out of the sunk costs that already are into that deal. So whether it's with Foxconn and their growth over time, or whether it's with other potential users of that is some of the most productive space in southeastern Wisconsin, in the Midwest. And so there's opportunities for that moving forward. It just isn't going to happen. There was a story that was laid out that Foxconn was magically going to, invest billions of dollars, $10 billion, and 13,000 people were going to magically appear. Well, that's just not the way economic development happens, and it's not the way it's ever happened. And so, those people who laid out that, I think should be held to account for it. I think where the Evers administration stepped in is to what can we reasonably make, what path can we forge that's going to make sure that there is some strong things that happen in southeastern Wisconsin with Foxconn, but how can we make sure that we have a 72-county economic development strategy too?
Sure. So moving forward, Foxconn really just seen as like one small part of Wisconsin's economic development strategy?
Well, I don't think there is one small part of Wisconsin's economic development strategy. Anybody who invests here plays a large role in it. But there are significant players in Wisconsin who continue to invest. And one of the things I would say about WEDC in general under Missy's leadership is they have tools that are really designed, have historically been designed for larger investments in larger companies. And at WEDC, they're truly trying to use some of those tools or create new tools, so they're investing in Main Street businesses and small businesses. We'll probably talk a little bit about what we've done through the response to COVID-19, and a lot of what WEDC has done is to invest in restaurants, to invest in startups, to try to make sure that we are doing the things in local communities around the state that have been the bedrock of this of Wisconsin since 1848, and how we have grown incrementally over time. I think that's one of the things that WEDC is really trying to do, and frankly, it's kind of hard to turn that ship around if when all of the tools have been towards kind of a Foxconn type project, and that was where all the focus was. I think trying to make sure that we can do something that has a rural focus, as they have done, and incorporates broadband and incorporates all the building blocks of economic development. That's something that they have tried hard and they will continue to do, and they've met with some success on that.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the pandemic. Clearly, you have done something that no other DOA secretary has had to do, and that is navigate a pandemic recovery. You also had a huge charge with DOA. I think we have a slide showing the amount of federal dollars coming to Wisconsin. You look at DOA's website and all of the grants and money that has gone out to Wisconsin, about $4.5 billion through various federal sources. You were charged at DOA with facilitating getting the money to communities under the governor's administration priorities: pandemic response, small business grants, tourism recovery, lodging, equity initiatives, school age. I mean, there's a lot
quite a
there.
list, yes.
There's a lot there.
Yeah.
I can't imagine how challenging that must have been for your agency and for you to administer that.
Well, I guess one thing I would start by saying is it wasn't one agency. This was an all-hands effort. So it was certainly led by Governor Evers. The public health side was led by the Department of Health Services and the leadership there. What DOA was charged with is working across the administration to really direct those resources in the most efficient and effective way. We have all been affected by COVID-19. You and I were talking before we came on here about it, the personal impact on our own families. And everyone knows that we have had just our lives changed by it. The economic impacts of COVID-19 have not been felt as equally, right? In the recession of 2008, 2009, that was felt almost across the board in every industry and every sector. Here, in the COVID-19 recession, it has been leisure, tourism, hospitality, restaurants, small businesses. And so it's been our charge as an administration to try to direct those funds in ways that can get to the people who need them, but also can be delivered as effectively as possible. And I would tell you this, and I'm going to become just a Wisconsin resident and a citizen within a couple of days, but I'm so proud to have worked alongside people in the state workforce who they didn't give up their day jobs to do all this work in distributing and allocating these federal resources. It was on top of everything else that they had to do. And they have done it well. When there was an opportunity for people to raise their hands and say, what else can I do? To a person across the administration, across the enterprise, they stood up and said, give me more, give us more opportunity. Whether it was securing PPE at the beginning of the pandemic and going quite literally to the ends of the earth to get that, outfitting planes so that they could send stuff out to other parts of the state, setting up a testing infrastructure where we had none previously in the state. All of that were things that were done within the state that were not like written in some manual of the how-to. How do you address this? And so I'm really proud to have been part of that effort, and it's ongoing. It continues. But to be in places like to be on main streets in cities around the state of Wisconsin. I was in Platteville last week, and we provided resources to a guy who owns 17 movie screens in Iowa and Grant counties, and he had trouble accessing the direct money from the federal government. He's now gotten an influx of cash twice from Governor Evers in the state of Wisconsin through the program that we have directly for movie theaters, because that's one area that's been hugely affected. He could not have stayed open for that, and there are all kinds of those all around, every main street in a small town has its movie house, and it's been oftentimes passed down from generation to generation. There are other small businesses and restaurants like that. That's who we've been able to provide support for, and it's very direct. We try to make it easy for them to access. I can guarantee you something's gone wrong along the way, and we'll probably get criticized for that, but we have done things, and we've tried to be aggressive in meeting those needs, and I just couldn't tell you, I can't tell you I could be more proud of being part of a state workforce that ideology, partisan politics aside, put their shoulder to the grindstone and worked on those issues. And I think that we have had great success with it.
It certainly was a huge responsibility, but I'm sure you're aware that there's not complete agreement on what the priorities are for putting out those funds. The Republican-controlled legislature, as recently as last week, put out legislation to direct the federal funds in a different area, and they've had previous legislation to do something similar. Last week it was law enforcement. What is your reaction to kind of the differing priorities in the legislature and their desire to have some control over the funds?
To be honest, I would tell you asked about the communications with the legislature, and this may not surprise you, but I've had some of my most productive conversations with legislators about how do we prioritize and how do we direct some of these federal funds. Not surprisingly, because the governor has it in his sole purview to be able to do that. We had the opportunity to do that. There could have been far more constructive conversations in the ongoing budget discussions, things that have happened for years, and those were less forthcoming. Those same people were a little less interested in having those conversations. And so, I think it's what we have tried to do is listen to stakeholders, listen to those industries that have been most affected, direct those. When it comes to priorities that ought to be in the state budget and priorities that we ought to invest in time after time after time, Wisconsin's in very good fiscal shape, far better than when the financial picture that the governor inherited. And And so, we should be looking at, and the legislature should be working with us to make those investments, whether it's in, the prison guards, whether it's in, correctional officers or Capitol police officers, or, making sure that we make those investments that aren't just one-time federal funds, but have a tail for them.
Put it in the budget.
We ought to be having those. We frankly should have had those conversations during that. We had, opportunities to have that over time, and the legislature, if I'm recalling correctly, didn't even meet for 7 or 8 months during 2020 at the height of the pandemic. And so, they're a little bit. It's a little bit of a kind of Johnny come lately, but everybody is welcome into the conversation. I think the governor would continue to welcome those conversations.
Mm-hmm. Now that you're moving on, I understand your last day is actually this Friday, January 14th. What have you learned over the last 3 years that you're taking on to the Greater Milwaukee Committee, and what do you hope to accomplish there?
Well, I've learned, I think, a lot about resilience in the state of Wisconsin. We have had every opportunity over the last couple of years to lose hope, and individuals can do that. And we've had federal programs that provide support for rental assistance, for small business support, all of those things. And with just when they need, sometimes people need a little help, and when they get that help, they are resilient. Communities are resilient. Families are resilient. So that's one lesson that I take away. And something else that I will apply absolutely to the next job and whatever I do moving forward is we have tried to aggressively act in response to COVID-19. As I said, we probably haven't done everything right. There are things, that we've gotten wrong. Where we've done that, we've tried to nimbly move on to something different, to change things, to alter things in midstream, because there is no playbook for how you deal with a pandemic and how you deal with the financial fallout to that. So making sure that we are taking action steps. And in a community like Milwaukee that has, such richness, but also has some longstanding problems, there is going to be a need for a bias towards action and to keep pushing on those things. And, so I will take that on. The other thing that I guess that I hope changes statewide, and I hope we start to move away from, is kind of the zero-sum game that is politics right now. Is, I necessarily have to make you lose in order for me to win, is the opinion of too many people in Madison. I didn't get into this for retribution, to take something away from someone else. I got into this because I kind of felt a calling that there was going to be a reason for us to be able to contribute, regardless of partisan nature, regardless of where you stand in the ideological spectrum. And I think we've missed opportunities as a state because too many people think, well, if you win something, then I necessarily lose. And I don't buy that. I think that there's ways that I think we can move forward together. And I look forward to kind of getting back into that role. I'll be working with the business community, with the nonprofit sector, with the legislature here on a number of issues. And I think that, there's great ways that we can continue to move forward together in Wisconsin, and we can set some of that stuff aside, some of what, has been built up and the rancor. Again, I may sound still a little idealistic, but after 3 years, they haven't been able to knock that idealism out of me.
We're coming full circle here. So, you're returning to the city that you love, right? Yes. You're investing in the city that you love. What are your priorities then for the Greater Milwaukee Committee? Is there anything that you want to do on day one, week one, first quarter? Well,
I never left the city of Milwaukee, so I commuted back and forth. One thing I welcome is a 7-minute commute instead of 70 miles each way, several days a week. But I think that the first thing I need to do, I've had kind of a foot in both camps. I've never been, never left the community, still had my ear to the ground, still very close to lots of the people there. But a lot of it is going to be listening to membership, working with the staff. There are 1,500 people who work at DOA. There's less than 15 who work at the Greater Milwaukee Committee.
So little smaller.
I will have an opportunity to get in to engage with them in much more deep conversation. 200 members, making sure that we do that. But at the same time, I'm going back to a Milwaukee that is having really generational change. There's a new mayor now, a different mayor than there was 2 or 3 weeks ago. There's an election coming up in April that either Chevy Johnson will continue to be mayor or there'll be a new mayor. And so, I think what I can bring to that is ensuring that whoever that is, that they have some success, that they have the community surrounding them and pushing them forward on important issues. Milwaukee faces some very big financial and fiscal challenges at the legislature here in Madison, and there is bipartisan support for giving Milwaukee some more flexibility. Being part of that effort is something that I look forward to and look forward to there being some forward progress on. And, those are not things that can necessarily happen overnight, but I hope I'm coming in with a vision of kind of what's happened at the wider lens, but also can be able to focus in it. And I know a lot about the community. I don't know everything, and there are always new people coming in and out. So a lot of it is going to be listening to them and making sure that we're formulating the right kind of strategy moving forward. The other thing that I would say is Milwaukee, with all the federal funds that have come in to Wisconsin, around workforce innovation, there are these neighborhood innovation grants, neighborhood investment grants that the governor will be announcing in the next several weeks. Some of those will be coming to, in and around Milwaukee. I look forward to making sure that they're efficiently and effectively directed so that the community can get elevated by that. Because if all we're trying to do with the COVID-19 recovery is get back to where we were in February of 2020, then we have lost time. And, there were a lot of issues that maybe we shed a bigger light on over the last 20 months, but issues that were there well before COVID-19 hit. And I think that's part of what I feel as a parent, as a community member, as a spouse who lives in the city of Milwaukee and who wants the region to really get to be lifted higher, is we better get to working on all of those things and not just going back to where we were. Because, progress is something that we absolutely have to have in order to be the community we want and to be the state that we want to be.
Sounds like you're moving on to another very large role there. So you have accomplished a great deal at DOA. Thank you for sharing that with us. But there's certainly unfinished business, particularly to do with the pandemic recovery. What are your words of advice for incoming Secretary Kathy Blumenfeld?
Oh, I think, and Kathy and I have had an opportunity to overlap for the last few weeks. We spent a little time on the road together. We were in southwestern Wisconsin last week. We'll be in Milwaukee tomorrow. And my advice to her, and she can take it for what it's worth, because everybody has to do this job differently, but it's support the people who are at DOA, support the people across the enterprise. The governor did a wonderful job of bringing in very diverse, talented people into this administration. And there are great people who have worked at DOA for a long time. Make sure what we're doing as leaders is supporting them and effectively promoting them and pushing them in ways, giving them opportunities to do what they do best. And I think with that, if you lean into that and you lean into them, which I have tried to do over the last 3 years, you can't lose, because the best thing about any job that I've ever done has been the people, and that's the same as what I am doing right now. The people who are involved in state service and the people who have raised their hand when called upon, or not even when they've been called upon, have stepped up and said, hey, what else can I do? I mean, I'm really proud to have been part of that, and I think that's the core of what makes Wisconsin great.
So, final question. You've spent a lot of your career in public service and then in the nonprofit sector, back in public service. Will we expect to see you back in public service in politics in the anytime in the future?
Oh, I have no idea. I've never done a job in search of another job or in preparation for another job. I hope everything that I've done, and we could spend the next half hour just going over all the jobs that I've had over the last 25 years, because for a long time I went from one to another. But I have enjoyed every moment of this public service. There's a reason, I think, why people say that the Secretary of DOA is the best job in state government, because of the breadth that you have and the ability to deal with a whole host of issues. We lived through these unprecedented times, and so I am really looking forward to digging in my local community on the issues that matter most there. And if we can do that and make Milwaukee better and elevate the region, then the state of Wisconsin does better. And I would take that as that's my next charge. I want to continue to do this, and I get the opportunity now to work with a new mayor, a relatively new county executive, legislative, some people in the legislature, all of those things that I appreciate and enjoy doing in service to the community. And so that's something I'm excited about. I'm not thinking, I'm just leaving one job going into the next. I'm not thinking about any job down the line.
Well, I think you might get asked that question again in the future, just saying. So, well, thank you so much for joining us, Secretary Brennan. We certainly do wish you the best.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Okay. And thank you to our viewers of Newsmakers, and be sure to tune in again as we highlight the issues and sit down with the decision makers who make a difference for our state and all of us.
This program is a production of Wisconsin Eye, an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit media network with a mission to inform, educate, and engage the citizens of Wisconsin. Wisconsin Eye is the nation's first and only independently funded state civic broadcast network, providing gavel-to-gavel access to government proceedings and events at the state capitol.